Welcome, everyone, to this episode of ECPG Live on Recovery Residences. I'm Tana Russell, Assistant Director of the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling, and glad you've joined us. I want to remind you that last year we did an episode on recovery supports and services. The link to that episode has been included in the blog for this episode for your convenience because they work together really well. So we want you to have access to that. As always, this is being streamed live to Facebook and YouTube, and we encourage your participation and comments. We have Rob Maya behind the scenes, as always, helping to manage the comments coming in from both platforms, as well as share with you some links and resources in the chat. So keep an eye out for that. I have joining me today Alan Muia. He is the chairperson of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences, WAQRR WAQRR.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your work there and what you do and how long you've been doing your work in this industry.
Sure, be glad to do that. So really have been at this for about 10 years or so in some capacity or other. And sort of my day job, aside from my work with WAQRR, is I am also an owner operator of where actually our nonprofit owns and operates 5 recovery residences in Mount Vernon, Washington, in Skagit County. So and that really was our kind of entry point into all of this. And that really actually started, I won't bore you with the whole story, but it started really in working in the jail and realizing what a huge role that addiction plays in our criminal justice system, and trying to create environments that would be a game changer for people who wanted to do things differently moving forward. And so that was sort of the spark of our inspiration. 10 years ago, we opened our first home, and as I said, we're now operating 5 of them in our county. And about 4 years ago now or so, a group of us who are doing the same kind of things got together and formed WAQRR, and to really kind of up our own game and to create some industry standard in the state of Washington around recovery residences and what that looks like. So those are kind of my 2 vocational lives anyway, that relate to our conversation today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And for people who are maybe new to the term recovery residence, and I've heard some other similar terms out there, can you tell us what it is exactly?
Sure. Recovery residence, the term is really a broad term that's kind of an umbrella over a number of different kinds of housing. So they're all housing for sure. And they all specifically cater to people who are in recovery from addiction. I'll say most of those homes, at least in our area, really do cater, or at least started their work in response to substance use disorders. So supporting people who have substance addictions. But as we know, and I'm sure you've talked about a lot, that addictions and these realms sort of overlap quite a bit. And so behavioral addictions like gambling and others play very much a part in the lives of the folks that we work with. And so our residences are abstinence-based. That's an important distinction from other kinds of housing, like a permanent supportive housing, for instance, or housing first model, where basically the idea is also known as kind of low barrier housing, where we really do focus. We do start with abstinence. We're super supportive of those other types of housing as a means to support people and maybe encourage them toward a road of recovery. The folks who live in our residences are at the outset committed to abstinence from whatever it is that they've decided to stop doing, and to move toward recovery in a really broad sense. And so recovery residences have all kinds of shapes and sizes. They can be everything from what you might have heard of Oxford houses. There are 350 Oxford houses in Washington state alone. And all the way to homes that look maybe even more like a treatment center in terms of the amount of structure and staffing and so on that they provide. And so recovery residence sort of provides kind of the umbrella for all of those types of homes, so they can look like a lot of different things. But they start primarily with abstinence, and they start with a real desire on behalf of residents and those who are managing the homes to help people move toward health and long-term recovery and healing.
And what might a typical day look like in one of these homes or houses?
Sure. And again, that's going to depend a lot on what we call the level of care. It's probably worth talking about that somewhere along the way today. But if in a lower level of care house, a person might the expectation would be that they're there all night, that they wake up in the morning and they may head to work or to school full time. They may live what from the outside, from someone who doesn't know their whole story, would look like a very normal life. But they would have some other responsibilities, including perhaps attendance at peer support meetings. They might almost always would have some sort of curfew requirement. And there would be people kind of involved in their lives. So that's sort of the lower level of care. Higher level of care, homes that offer more in the way of support services and accountability, may have a morning meeting that start out the day of some sort of meditation or faith-based activities for faith-based homes. And those folks may not be in the workforce yet. They may be going to some sort of treatment during the day and/or mental health counseling. And folks who are in early recovery of any kind usually have some catching up to do on life stuff. So they may very well be dealing with legal issues and all of that. So all of that kind of goes on during the day. And the higher the level of care in the home, the more connected they are to, again, sources of accountability and support. That would be staff within a home who might be helping them kind of do what we might call case management, just walking alongside them through those journeys and helping them figure out what's next for them and what's the next challenge and how do they go about getting there. I think one of those sort of life skills that we work on quite a bit is financial management and debt relief and debt reduction. And so how all of that kind of falls into place will depend on the level of care that's in the home, as well as kind of the readiness of the individual to dive into some of those challenges.
That's interesting. And you mentioned how some might start with a morning meeting. There might be some spiritual things, might be some financial management. Are there other types of activities or programs or classes, et cetera, that people may have access to
Sure.
while they're
So
living it?
almost always there's going to be some peer recovery meetings, either required outside of the house. Most homes that have some structure to them will have their own internal meeting. And our umbrella, as I said, of recovery residence is very broad. So there's a lot of room under that umbrella for different kind of flavors and types of homes. But there might be homes that really specialize in smart recovery, or there might be traditional 12-step kinds of support systems, or obviously in faith-based homes, they're going to be sort of spiritual components and maybe attendance at an external church or something like that. There might be we do a lot in our homes, really specifically around conflict resolution. So helping people kind of navigate their conflicts with each other, which are for sure going to occur in a group setting. But then also we help people kind of re-engage with their families, with spouses, with kids, adult kids, maybe even who have sort of pushed people away because of their addiction, because of their struggle. And so much of recovery is sort of getting things back, so to the extent that you can lose something, recovery is the process of sort of stepping back into it. And whether that's a support relationship or again, financial health, or often physical health for people who have really abused their bodies with substances or other kinds of neglect. They're spending time with physicians and at the Y or other places trying to sort of get that back. Nutrition as well. So there are certainly homes that focus a lot on kind of eating together, which kind of really clicks two things off the list, right? So social interaction as well as just good nutritional practice. And just helping people kind of get into, I was going to say back into regular life, but for some people, they haven't had regular life before. And so we try to create the environment that sort of establishes those rhythms for them that then can lead to health. And so that can be, sometimes that's formal classes, as you referred to, but sometimes it's just modeling that for people and having people who have been at it longer modeling it for others. And so peer connection is absolutely part of the secret sauce. No matter what the flavor of the home looks like, those connections with other peers are just vitally essential to the success of our residents.
That's neat. It kind of sounds like that secret sauce, so to speak. It sounds like it could probably create something that feels a bit like a family, kind of why they're there, even though they're connecting with their other family members, but that environment seems the way it's structured and supportive and communication, kind of like one.
Very much so. And all the struggles that families have with each other, the personalities rub each other the wrong way, or but also all the beautiful things that happen in families. So support and over time, some unconditional acceptance, some of those kind of things you start to see in groups that have gelled together and really figured some things out, or even individuals who come to the group really desiring a sense of connection and being willing to put themselves out there to get there. Can really make a big difference. And we say this a lot. It's kind of a tagline for us, and that is, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And we really believe that strongly. And that's just a kind of a mantra that is used a lot in our field, because that's what we have to offer, is connection. So trying to connect people, and through kind of these learning laboratories, these places of living together with some support and some accountability, people can learn to do that. So that family kind of word picture makes a lot of sense, especially when family up until they may move into us hasn't necessarily been a positive kind of concept for them. So trying to reinvent that for some folks is a major challenge, but also ultimately can be a real blessing for them.
And are these residences accessible to individuals that may have other co-occurring disorders, be it gambling or mental health or even disabilities, etc.? Are they eligible as well?
Yeah, and so I would say almost with very few exceptions, the people who come to us have something co-occurring going on. And if you define co-occurring really broadly, we're talking about, addiction isn't just one chemical or one behavior. For most of us, and including us, we call ourselves normies who may not have struggled with substance addiction. There's some addiction. There's some sort of behavior that's out of balance in our lives. And so if you think about co-occurring disorders being a really broad term, anyone who comes to us, regardless of kind of the presenting issue or the one thing that sort of got them over the line to say, hey, I need help, there's almost always something else going on. And I would also say, by definition, almost always that's a mental health condition of some sort. And there's a little bit of a chicken and egg that happens there, where either the mental health condition leads a person into addiction because of just the propensity to self-medicate and try to find something that will work, or the other way around, where somebody has been living in addiction long enough to where it has affected the balance of their life in such a way to where other kind of mental illness presents itself. So again, I'd say just a strong affirmation of your observation that really anyone who comes to us, generally speaking, has more than one thing going on. Just like the rest of us, right? We're complex people.
Very, very complex humans with complex needs. And, there isn't any like one magic thing that is the make or break for a person's recovery. It's usually positive changes and activities and supports in as many areas of their life as possible, all at once, that are most helpful.
Well said. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to know, what about for people who maybe gambling is their primary addictive disorder? Are recovery residences open to them? Or are there services they can access that would be helpful for them?
I think it's going to depend, honestly, on the residents. So again, remember the recovery residence is a big tent, and in that tent are a lot of different kind of flavors, sizes, support levels, and so on. And so I know there are residences who are willing to say, okay, if that's your primary presenting issue, you come on in and we'll work with you on that. Generally speaking, in our universe anyway, there's going to be an assumption that sobriety from chemicals is going to be a part of the mix, no matter what the presenting issue is. So even if someone says, "You bet, we'd be glad to welcome you in to work on your gambling addiction," you need to know this is also a sober environment, and so it would be pretty common for them to be expected to go to support meetings and so on, and likely those would be around the gambling issue. But there's probably going to be drug and alcohol testing in the home as well, and those things so often go together anyway. But so a person who's coming in wanting to be abstinent from gambling behavior, probably to live in one of our residences, is probably going to need to also be willing to be abstinent from substances, from mind-altering substances. So that's sort of a calculation that a person would need to make. My sense is, when that happens, they probably get more out of it than what they expected, and that there's some really goodness to sort of living. We call it living in the lack, right? And in the lack is when we really get to know ourselves, and where we really get to struggle with what's in front of us, and work on those deeper issues that are at root in all of our addictions and our coping behaviors. So I think there are homes that would say absolutely come on in, but there's a bigger package that the folks would probably need to sign on to in order to be there.
That's fantastic. That also kind of makes me think of tobacco. It's kind of one of those that it's hugely addicting, but also very underrated.
Yes.
And sometimes kind of just glossed over. And I have seen over the past several years more facilities, be it both treatment facilities, hospitals, recovery-oriented systems, kind of take a bit of a step up in not just being supportive of people who say, "Hey, I want to quit," but also providing some cessation services or referrals or supports, or starting to say, great, if you want to quit while you're here, we're going to help you get some patches or some gum or lozenges, or we're providing a non-smoking outdoor break area, where in history there's often been only a smoking outdoor break area, which is,
so if you want to go outside, right, you got to learn to smoke, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I wanted to know, are some of the recovery residences doing the same? Is there anything specific they do to help support people there that are maybe trying to quit tobacco as well?
Well, first I'll say that the research really backs up what you're saying, that a person's propensity to relapse is significantly higher if they continue to smoke during their abstinence from whatever it is they're trying to stop doing. So because it's the same brain chemicals, right? So I'll spare you the lecture, but it's the same brain chemicals that we're flirting with when we're giving into any particular addiction. And so when those things are out of balance, the chances of them being out of balance in another area are higher. So a person who is smoking, continues to smoke, is more likely to return to use or to return to the behavior that they said they were going to stop. So that's, for whatever that's worth, that's a reason for that. I would say that I know there are residences who have taken that on and said, hey, this needs to be a part of the package here. But I'll say, just practically speaking, it's a real challenge, just candidly, that we haven't gotten there yet as a recovery field, to tie those things together on the ground as much. So as you say, I mean, there's certainly homes that will help, and we count ourselves among them, of course, that would say, boy, if you want to quit, we're going to do everything we can to help you, and we're going to walk alongside you and provide support for that. There are a few homes that I know of who just would require cessation, or would have some sort of ramp to that, or would require that someone quits before they come, which again is kind of an extreme policy decision. but the research backs it up that if you really want to do this for the long haul, this might be a good thing to just do. Research is also, as the last I've read, is pretty clear that stopping cold turkey from cigarettes is one of the most effective ways. So even the whole ramping deal, if you were just looking at the research base, you might say, boy, there's something to be said for a policy that says no smoking. Now, the question is, would you get anyone to live in your place? If that was I think that's the fear that some operators have, is I'm not sure we'd be able to get enough residents if we did that right out of the gate. So the more common model is the one that you suggest, where they're encouraging of cessation and they're figuring out ways to incentivize that for residents and help them through it.
Yeah, and I have been doing or started doing tobacco treatment back in 2009. So I've seen it kind of come through this big evolution over the past decade. And that fear you were just talking about of facilities thinking, well, if we go completely non-smoking, staff and clients, what will that do to our business? And there's fears there. But what I have found really fascinating is the research shows it doesn't have any impact.
Oh, is that right? Well, that's helpful. I'll pass that along.
It's actually helpful.
It does come up quite a bit.
Yeah, because people still need the help of the main services that they provide, and those haven't gone anywhere.
Right.
And for the people who do come and are there working on their recovery from whatnot, it being in an environment that is tobacco free, and they may provide patches or something, et cetera, to help with withdrawal, and that's perfectly appropriate. They do better. Like for what you're saying, that the two go hand in hand. And with gambling, speaking of co-occurring disorders, the number one with gambling is alcohol, and close second is tobacco.
Sure.
I don't know the data on methamphetamine, but it's generally considered a close third as well. They just go together.
Right. It's like coffee and a cigarette, right? Which also go together, it seems to me.
Exactly.
Not that we're going to throw caffeine in the mix here, but it's worth a conversation somewhere along.
Yeah, you know what? Caffeine and
You're okay
food
with that?
addiction don't get enough conversation as
Okay, all right.
I'll add to that, especially in the U.S., where we've got some really great food and it's all very addicting. And
that's
I
right.
can relate to that. Let's see, Rob, if we could pull in a comment from Nancy, who's tuning in on Facebook. She asks, are you aware of any discussion in the management operator community in the casinos of being nicotine free at the facility level? And I guess I can speak to that.
Sure.
Yes, I am. And there's actually some good research out of Australia. If you do a little Google search, it's going to come right up in the first few searches on a federally regulated move to make casinos all tobacco free. This was a push for their staff to protect their staff from the effects of secondhand smoke. And what the result of that was an initial dip in sales that then went back to normal fairly quickly, but a big reduction in problem gambling. And that's a whole nother training session, actually, to get into the connection between problem gambling and tobacco and the overlap with treatment and prevention. But there are, and I know some casinos have a smoking area and a smoke-free area. Some are completely smoke-free. It's really up to the casino what they want to do. But yeah, that's a good question, Nancy. Let's see. So how does someone get into a recovery residence? So if anybody's listening or watches this after they're live and they're like, oh my gosh, that's what I need, or that's what my loved one needs, how do I find it? How do they get it?
Sure. Well, there are a number of ways. So on our website, WAQRR.org, WAQRR.org, we have there's a little tab at the top that says Find Housing or Find Recovery Housing, and so that will take you within a couple clicks to a searchable directory. We recommend, and I'm sending you there first because if a house is on our list, it means that we've accredited that residence. And for us, we feel strongly that accreditation is important because there are certainly homes out there that put themselves out there as recovery residences that really operate with no sense of accountability. So it's hard to kind of recommend them. There's nobody externally who comes in and looks to be sure that they're safe and that they're meeting any kind of standard of fairness and care for their folks. There's no Washington regulatory authority over residences. And so we like to say, for us, it's important that people choose carefully. That said, most places, if you just hear about them, most will have a website and some will have online applications. But if you start with a list, that's a good place. Also, Oxford House, again, as I said, there are 350 Oxford houses in Washington. So that by far is the largest recovery residence network. And so if you go to oxfordvacancies.com, the Oxford House or it's also, I think, in your resources here connected to this webinar, but there is a place there that you can find out where there are actual vacancies in your area and apply directly online to those houses. So there really is, Oxford has a really good system of doing that. And Oxford houses have accountability kind of baked into their formula. So there's a kind of local network and there's accountability that's available to homes. And so there are regional staff who go around and are sure that really try to ensure that things are operating well. So again, I guess I start all that by saying choose carefully. But I think generally speaking, the treatment centers and other places where people would get treatment would have access to lists of kind of local places. And then through our directory, they can look statewide to see what's available. Caveat is that our directory is fairly new. We're only a couple years old in posting the directory. And so there's a limited number of homes on there now, but that will grow over time. And we're, in fact, really looking forward to this next couple of years, a really significant increase in the number of accredited homes in Washington that we can feel a lot better about referring people to. So,
off the top of your head, are you able to share a bit of maybe some of those best practices for recovery residences, some of the key things you look for to accredit and recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. We first and foremost, one sort of whole category around operation that we look at is ethics. So, and by that we mean, does a recovery residence operator treat its residents well? That means things like, is there a refund policy that's really clear? Is it really clear when someone pays that they get a receipt? Is it clear that when there are program requirements that a person knows what they are before they sign up to live in a house? Is it clear what would happen if a person returns to use or returns to their behavior while they're living in the house? And if that's something that is that someone can be removed from the house, is that really clear what that process looks like? Is there a process in place that's fair to residents, that everyone understands ahead of time, so that again people go in with their eyes wide open about what they're signing up for? And people do sign up for accountability for sure, but it shouldn't be surprise accountability. It should be very clear about what they're getting into. We obviously do a walkthrough of the houses, a thorough inspection where we look right down to are the right kinds of outlets in the wall near sinks so that people don't get shocked. Is there exposed wiring? Is there paint peeling off the wall? Is the furniture accommodating? Does it look more like a house or like a hospital? Those kinds of things we care about deeply because we're trying to foster this family environment. And so if something that looked a lot more like an airport waiting area than a house, that would be a problem for us. If there was no real recovery support that's noticeable, we would have a real issue there. We'd say, well, how was this place different than the boarding house down the street that doesn't offer recovery support? So it needs to kind of walk like a duck for us to feel like we can support it and feel good about it. And I just mean by that there's certain kind of hallmarks that we look for: recovery support, ethics, safety. They need to have a good neighbor policy. That's another one that's toward the end of our quality standards. That means that in their neighborhoods, they need to fit in and be good neighbors. If there needs to be a process whereby if a neighbor complains about the noise or the smoke or the parking or the extra cars or whatever, that there's a process in place where the neighbor knows where to go to have that dealt with. There needs to be a complaint process for residents. So when a resident has a concern, it needs to be very clear to residents in writing, posted in the house somewhere, where they go with that concern. What happens if it doesn't get dealt with at the first level? What's the second level and the third level? And then ultimately they would come to us as an accrediting organization to say, hey, we think that I think that my housing provider is violating one of your standards. And then we would step in and actually investigate that. So anyway, there was a long answer to your question, but we look at a lot of things, and all, of course, for the good of the people who we're trying to serve ultimately.
Well, thank you. That was it was great to have a little peek behind the scenes on what goes into that and the standards of care. That's really, really appreciated. Thank you. And I just want to point out for folks, we've got Roxanne Waldron. Hey, Roxanne, tuning in on Facebook. She posted a link to the HCA Recovery Residences page. And I just remind everybody, for any links that we missed adding to the blog at the beginning that might come up in the course of our live episodes, we'll get that added so that everybody tuning in on YouTube can also get the links shared just by going to the blog. And let's see, Nancy posted another comment or question here. Since cigarettes, alcohol, and meth are the big three that create a robust environment for habitual gamblers, has it been discussed with casino managers, operators might invest in promoting awareness of referrals to cessation and or treatment for these underlying problems and the recovery house tool? That is a great question, Nancy. So let me say this. At ECPG, we actually have a responsible gaming staff training and resources program that we do at casino facilities for all of their frontline employees and their supervisors and managers. And this is actually a great idea to also maybe include a little resource list for some of these co-occurring issues that they may also hear clients express. But basically, it trains individuals on how to recognize statements that guests might make that are concerning about their gambling. I can't pay my rent this month, etc. How to respond, how to refer to take care of their guests and customers. And I like, Nancy, that you're integrating this into that, because it all connects. I will say, in general, more people seem to be informed about what kind of substance resources are out there in their communities, and not quite as informed or aware of what problem gambling resources are out there.
That's fair. That's been my experience as well.
Right.
That's right.
But
and yet they go hand in hand so often, and they really
all the
do.
time. Yeah, they go hand in hand so often. And like you said, they affect each other. And if you don't treat the whole person, are you really treating the person?
Yeah. So we have had, I want to talk about this for a second. The conundrum in our world is, do we not allow people to visit casinos who are our residents? Obviously, in lower level of care homes, that would be impossible to kind of to live out, right? We couldn't enforce that. But for those of us who run facilities with higher levels of care, we're on the fence about that a lot. And some of us have decided, well, would rather have an open communication about that, so that when someone does go and they blow it, in all kind of ways you can blow it at a casino, but you know what I mean? We would rather have the conversation with them afterward, instead of, if we prohibit something, then it goes underground, and then we're not even able to have the conversation about choices. So, and then there are some who say, hey, this stuff goes hand in hand, and so we are going to prohibit those visits altogether. And again, enforcement is an issue there, because it's off site. But it really is. We need to have more conversation within our ranks about the best way to have policy, and the policies that make the most sense. So.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting, particularly if someone were to come in whose primary addiction disorder is gambling. and they're asked to abstain from alcohol, even though that might not be their addiction issue
choice or whatever. Yeah.
But then someone comes in for substances, but is allowed to continue gambling. But then you can do a drug screen for substances. There is no drug screen for gambling.
Right.
It's all the honor system.
Right. Although, I mean, I think in fairness, so we have had, just from our own personal experience, we have had residents come to us for whom that has been a real issue. And we've asked them up front, would you like us to hold you accountable to going to the casino? Would you like that to be a part of your arrangement? Can we have a contract with you about that issue? And if they're serious about stopping, they will do that. And we've taken numerous residents around and had themselves banned from casinos and so on who are more serious. And obviously, that those have some limitations as well, those arrangements. But it would, to the extent that they've identified that as an issue, there are opportunities or ways we can work with them on it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And like you said, part of the main thing is just to give them a safe place to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Is this something you're concerned about? How can we help? And it may be as simple as, let's take you to X, Y, and Z casino so you can self-exclude.
Yeah.
Right. Let's help you get access to some sort of payee service to help you manage your finances.
Yes.
Right. Let's get you connected to a certified gambling counselor who you can go start seeing for counseling and treatment.
Yeah. All those.
So I wanted to know, and of course the data is limited on this, but what have you kind of seen as far as pandemic effects on this whole, on people's recovery and access to these recovery residences, or people who were in the recovery residence when the pandemic happened and things got locked down? What's been your experience there?
Well, I can tell you there's data, and it's pretty overwhelming that addiction rates are up, overdose rates are way up. And so we know, and if that's true of substance addiction, we know it's true of other kinds of addiction, behavioral addictions, other just coping behaviors. And again, if we really believe the idea that that isolation, or that the opposite of addiction is connection, then by isolating everybody, which is what we did for all of our safety, there's going to be fallout from that. And so we have absolutely seen that among our providers. We know that the number of people who've returned to use significantly increased in 2020. Just on the ground, what's happened is for a while, all of the recovery meetings, the in-person gatherings of people ceased. They stopped. And so you could do that on Zoom, but I'll be interested to see how that research comes out over time. But essentially what we know anecdotally is that just doesn't work for everybody. And while there are some significant connections being made, and it's better than nothing, that's kind of what we hear a lot, better than nothing. But boy, there's nothing like being able to literally rub shoulders with somebody and feel that kind of connection. There's chemical and an emotional connection that happens by being in person, connected to somebody, that is absolutely a part of the secret sauce of recovery. And when we take that away, it's a game changer. Now, that said, our folks who live in our environments and these families that we talked about have an advantage over people who are trying to do recovery alone, or maybe just in their little family unit, and that brings with it its own set of stresses that often lead them to addictive behavior to begin with. So we have these environments where we're able to support people through all of that. And so I think even though, as I said, our relapse rates were up, I would say that generally speaking, our residents fared better than people who are doing recovery in that same stage of recovery alone, or kind of living on their own, or with other folks who aren't as focused on recovery, or who aren't aware of what they're going through as much as their kind of recovery family would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know isolation and stress they're huge recovery triggers, and we've been isolated and stressed for 2 years. So.
Well, let's add to that. So isolation, stress, boredom, which is kind of a strange thing to pair with stress. And the fourth thing is a pandemic relief check. And so you put those things together, and they're the perfect storm for return to use or return to just, that behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people, when they get a $1,400 check in the mail and one of their addictions is to go spend it, how many folks can turn that down when they're isolated and their accountability sources and all of that stuff has been sort of compromised? Just a recipe for disaster,
Yeah.
for so many folks.
Yeah, absolutely. The stimulus check, the vaccine lottery, right? There's things that are part of our community and society that you might not think about it in the moment, but they can have an impact on people in recovery that are trying to abstain from things that are triggering, and then they come up sometimes.
And coincidentally, right, that the casino started opening back up at about the time the stimulus checks were coming out, one wave of them anyway. And so, boy, I mean, it's really, talk about a tough scenario to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to move on to any other services and resources available for Recovery Capital. And I want to bring in, we can start this off with one comment that Roxanne Waldron shared. Thank you for reminding me of this here. On self-exclusion, starting in January, fingers crossed, there will be a state self-exclusion program for commercial venues where a person can sign up without having to go to a casino.
Great.
So the state lottery is already in phase 1 of their voluntary self-exclusion program, and more is coming just to make it easier and a smoother process for individuals. So we're looking forward to that as it develops. And she also adds the Gambling Commission is working on finalizing the rules for that. So everybody just stay tuned, keep an eye out. It's coming. So we're excited to see that.
That's great news. And we hope to hear from you then, Tana, when that comes out. We'd love to spread that to our network so that our folks, our operators can have easy access to those resources.
Absolutely.
For the residents. That'd be great.
Yep. And the tribal casinos are also able to join that program as well if they would like to. And so what other services and resources are available for people to access to build their recovery capital while they're on this journey?
Boy, there's so much. There's a growing number of those things. And recovery capital, just for those who aren't familiar with the term, is just one we use more and more. It just has to do with those resources that are available for people to sort of build their network, to build the scaffold of their recovery. So it's just so easy. It's so easy to go back to old ways of being when there's nothing to kind of grab onto where you're headed, right? And so recovery capital is just those measures of. So there are a number of resources. Anything that connects people to community, even in the broader sense, whether it's a recovery focused community or not, we spend a lot of time asking people, boy, who's in your support system? And it doesn't have to be people in recovery. We think it's helpful to have people who have been there to walk alongside. But, if you think about the kind of support networks that you and I have, they're really broad. If I have a car question, then there's a person I can call. If I have a financial question, there's a person I can call. Maybe 2 or 3 different kinds of financial questions. There are different people I would talk to. If there's a health question or question about relationship or marriage or whatever, we have these broad networks of people that has taken us kind of a lifetime to put together. And I'm just always reminded when people step into recovery and they've sort of pushed all of that away, that they really that they find themselves in this vacuum of all of those kinds of connections. And so anything that connects people to community, and that could be church, that could be sports, hobby kind of stuff. So even outside of the recovery community, there are also a growing number of resources for financial literacy. Our local community action agencies have resources for financial literacy for people. Thankfully, even the banks and the financial systems are now kind of stepping up with their own tools, which we find can be really helpful. There are, again, I guess I just keep going back to anything that connects people to people. We spend a lot of time and energy getting people even to their doctors, and to just as a way of building recovery capital. Recovery capital is having a healthy body and even just healthy emotional system. So anything we can do with mental health counseling, all of those resources tie back into recovery capital for people. I think about recovery capital, and it may be a lack or negative capital, or something that drains, would be things like, by draining, I mean that just kind of work against the collection of recovery capital, would be like legal entanglements, people who don't work through their legal issues. So I think the court systems, even locally, have gotten better and better at helping people reestablish themselves. There are driver's license clinics. There are ways to get old convictions expunged from criminal records. All of those things, which could seem a little tangential, especially if you're in the mainstream lifestyle and you haven't experienced that kind of wreckage to your life. But those things are vitally important. You've got to deal with sort of the negative influences as well as kind of the capital building sort of resources. So we really try to build networks for folks in all of those areas, and in our homes, try to have, in fact, one question we ask operators as they're going through our accreditation process is, how do you connect residents to recovery resources? And we mean that in the broadest possible sense. How do you help them build their networks while they're with you? We like to say, when someone graduates our program, the only thing we want to change is their address. Meaning, while they're with us, they're building these networks, they're building these connections with outside agencies and with support systems and help and emotional support, personal emotional support. Those rhythms that I talked about earlier in their lives are operating at such a high level that when they move, all that's in place, and they move because they're ready to do the next thing. But it's not an artificial institutional kind of environment that once they leave it, everything changes. The last thing we want to be is that, because we want to sort of deinstitutionalize people. So recovery capital is a huge subject. As you can tell, I can go on and on about it, but
yes,
things we think about.
And I'll remind folks, we have the other live episode on recovery supports and services where they talk about so much I couldn't possibly recite them off the top of my head. So go check out that episode for more on that. And one thing you made me think of is, gosh, you're so great. You made me think of a lot of things. When a person gets to that maintenance stage of their recovery, it doesn't mean all of these recovery activities that they have been doing cease.
No,
in the
sure.
maintenance stage, some of those that they find the most helpful are now a permanent part of their lifestyle. Yeah. And the maintenance is, now I have this new lifestyle and I can maintain it. And for some people, that means maybe they go to 12-step the rest of their life. I had a friend who said, if my recovery means, and she's like, 12 steps work for me. They don't work for everybody. They work great for me. She's like, right. If that means I go to them the rest of my life, that's a small price to pay from what I gave up. Yeah. Right.
Would you go to the doctor once a week if it kept you alive?
Right. Right. Yeah. You just keep doing it. That means taking medications as prescribed for as long as prescribed. It might mean mental health counseling long-term. It can mean whatever it needs to mean for that person. And you can also think outside the box. I think sometimes people's minds go straight to treatment and support groups, or treatment and AA, NA, GA, but you can also think cultural activities, sweat lodges, groups, community groups, support groups for other things, for veterans, for grandparents raising their grandchildren, for grief, for all of these things. All of those can be a part of someone's recovery.
Yeah. Can I pontificate for a second about about the word maintenance? I think it trips us up. We use it in our settings and we know what we're talking about, but I think we just had a conversation this morning with a group of residents at the house that I oversee personally, and we were talking about the idea of change. we started talking about the change that happened. What is it that caused you to step into recovery to begin with? And usually that's a pretty drastic thing, and usually it takes a lot to get people in that direction. So that's a major change. But then we talked about the idea that if we're not working on something, if we're not changing, if we're not developing in some way, we tend to go backward. So recovery isn't the process of just maintaining. And again, I don't want to, I know there's this sort of clinical meaning to all of that, that there is a stage called maintenance. Maintenance isn't just everything stays the same and I'm good now. That we really want people to, I want to be able to ask anybody in recovery, or any healthy person for that matter, what are you working on? And what I'd like to be able to hear is, well, here's what I'm getting better at, or here's what I learned yesterday, or boy, I'm trying to not do this as much in my relationships, or I'm eating better than I was 6 months ago, or I'm getting better. Thankfully, we never arrive, right? And so it's a big part of the recovery process.
I like that. If we could maybe take a minute to reframe the word maintenance, we could maybe say it's maintaining growth, progress, development, continually pursuing towards your goals, but your goals just change over time.
Right. Yeah. We just keep upping the bar, right? We're moving the bar anyway.
All right. As we're wrapping up on time here, we've got one last question from Nancy. She asks, can a person live in a recovery house when they are on probation or parole?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You bet. And in fact, that's a pretty common scenario. I don't know of anyone who would not allow that. I guess there could be somebody. We have a little joke in our organization that says there's a felony question on our application. Have you been convicted of a felony? And then underneath it says, if not, please explain. It's like we are looking for people who have some repair work to do, and who we can walk alongside to get to the place where they're no longer on probation or parole. So it's almost goes without saying.
And probation and parole, I've worked in that industry before.
Yeah.
It can be pretty complex to navigate on its own. And then you tie into that treatment program and its rules. You tie into that a recovery house and its program and its rules. And really, people are going to do much better when they've got a support system around them to help them navigate all those overlapping.
Even just, have you ever used a calendar before to keep all that stuff straight?
Right.
And I'm not surprised, but over time I've just become used to the people saying, well, no, I keep it in my head. I'm like, well, that's not going to work anymore. You can't miss a court appointment that's 2 months out because you thought you'd remember it.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I could keep going, but for the sake of time, we should really let you get back to the rest of your day. And thank you, everybody who was tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Thanks all.
Thanks.